Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It was one of those sleepy late spring afternoons when the sun poured in through the kitchen windows, and everything felt a little slower, softer. I had just finished watering the hydrangeas along the porch and was putting the kettle on when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mark was out playing cards with his cousins, and I had been looking forward to a quiet day alone. Just me, a new mystery novel, and some lemon ginger tea. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and peeked out the window. It was Jason, my friend Carol's nephew. I hadn't seen him in years, not since he was barely out of college, tall and lean with an easy grin and a kind voice that made you want to sit beside him on a porch swing and just listen. I opened the door, surprised. Jason. He smiled, that familiar crooked smile. "Hey, Claire. Hope I'm not barging in. Aunt Carol mentioned you lived nearby." I was in the area, and I don't know, I just felt like a cup of tea and a familiar face. I blinked, but smiled. "Well, you found the right house. Come on in." He stepped inside, and I noticed right away how different he looked. Still handsome, yes, but softer around the edges, like life had been weathering him gently. There was something in his eyes, too. Thoughtful. Maybe even a little tired. I led him to the kitchen and poured water into 2 mugs, placing them on the table. "Still lemon ginger?" I asked. He laughed. "You remember that?" "I'd remember lots of things," I said, sitting across from him. We sat in silence for a moment as the tea steeped, the scent of citrus and ginger curling between us. "How's Carol?" I asked, breaking the quiet. "She's good. Still thinks I need to settle down," he said, chuckling. "But you know her. Always pushing me towards some version of life she dreamed up years ago." "Sounds about right," I said with a knowing nod. "And how are you, really?" His eyes flicked up to mine, and that's when I saw it, the reason he came. Not for tea. Not really. He needed someone to talk to. Someone outside his orbit. "I've been feeling untethered," he said finally. "Like I'm living everyone else's version of success. Good job, nice apartment, decent dating life. But I'm not sure any of it feels real to me anymore." I leaned back slightly in my chair, taking him in. "That's a big thing to carry." He nodded, his voice quieter now. "It is. I thought by now I'd feel like I belonged somewhere. To something. But the truth is, I just feel unseen." Something about the way he said it pierced me. I felt a sharp ache, not for him alone, but for myself too. Because that word, unseen, had followed me through much of the last few years like a shadow I didn't want to acknowledge. "I know that feeling," I said softly. "More than I'd like to admit." His gaze met mine again, and there was a kind of mutual pause between us. Like 2 people suddenly aware of just how much life had shaped and shifted them in similar ways, even if our journeys had been different. "When did it happen for you?" he asked. I looked out the window at the light flickering through the trees. "Not all at once. It's quiet. It sneaks in between laundry loads and grocery trips and conversations that feel more like checklists than real connection. One day I just realized no one had asked me how I was really doing in months. Not even my husband, and I had stopped asking myself." Jason nodded, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "I thought you always seemed so sure of yourself." I smiled gently. "We all have our masks, but underneath, we're all just trying to remember who we are." A breeze pushed through the open window, rustling the edge of a tea towel. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. "I think I came here because I knew you'd understand," he said. "You always had this calm about you. Like you saw people before they had to explain themselves." His words caught me off guard. I felt my chest tighten, not with discomfort, but with something like recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that maybe I hadn't disappeared entirely. Maybe someone still saw me. "Thank you," I said, voice softer than before. "That means more than you know." We talked for hours. About his childhood, about the women he dated but never really let in. About how he felt pressure to keep moving, achieving, doing, when all he really wanted was to be. He asked about me too. About my art, something I hadn't spoken about in years. I told him how I used to paint at night when the world felt too loud. How I stopped when the silence started feeling safer. "You should paint again," he said. "You light up when you talk about it." I laughed softly. "It's been a long time." "Maybe that doesn't matter," he said. "Maybe what matters is whether you still want to." That question settled somewhere deep in me. It was well past sunset when Jason finally stood to leave. The kitchen had grown dim, lit only by the last orange streaks of evening and the faint glow from the stove clock. "I'm glad I came," he said at the door. I didn't expect that talk. But I think I needed it more than I knew. "So did I said honestly. He smiled again, and there was something different about it now. Less performative, more grounded. "Good night, Claire." "Good night, Jason." After the door closed, I stood in the quiet for a while, staring at the empty mugs on the table. There was no music, no television, just me and the lingering warmth of a conversation that had reminded me what it felt like to be truly present with someone else and with myself. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had come home to a part of me I thought I'd lost. The next morning, I woke up with a strange kind of energy humming beneath my skin. Not jittery or nervous, more like awareness. Like something had shifted, even if only slightly. It was as if Jason's visit had stirred a part of me I hadn't spoken to in years. A part that had grown quiet, tucked away behind years of tending to everyone else's needs, but my own. I moved through my usual routine, fed the cat, folded laundry, made a second cup of coffee without really thinking. But everything felt lighter. As I passed by the kitchen table, my eyes landed on the 2 empty mugs still sitting there from the night before. I hadn't cleared them. Maybe because I didn't want to erase what happened. That conversation lingered like the smell of tea leaves still trapped in the porcelain. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Jason. "I hope I didn't overshare yesterday. But thank you again. You made me feel like I wasn't crazy for wanting more." I smiled before I even finished reading it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I responded. "You weren't oversharing. You were being honest. And that's rare. I'm glad you came." The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then came back again. Then finally, "Would you be up for more tea sometime?" I think that talk helped more than I expected. I stared at the screen for a long second. My first instinct was to say no, not because I didn't want to, but because I had grown used to making myself smaller, saying no to things that were just for me. But this wasn't about romance. This wasn't about escape. This was about presence. And I remembered what it had felt like to be seen, to speak freely without adjusting my voice for someone else's comfort. Asterisk, yes, I typed back. Let me know when. That Saturday afternoon, Jason came by again. This time he brought pastries from the little French bakery near the square. I hadn't had their raspberry tarts in years. We set everything out on the back patio, where the wisteria was starting to bloom and the sunlight filtered through the branches like soft lace. He looked more relaxed than before, still thoughtful, but not as tightly wound. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his shoulders didn't look like they were carrying the same weight. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about," he said as we settled into the cushioned chairs. "About feeling unseen. About asking for more." "And?" I asked gently. "I think I've been scared to admit I'm lost. I've been pretending for so long that I started believing it myself. But after talking with you, I realized maybe being lost isn't the worst thing. Maybe it means you're ready to find something new." I nodded. "Or maybe to find something old you'd forgotten about." He smiled at that. "Like your painting." I glanced down at my teacup. "Yes, like my painting." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "Do you ever feel like your life isn't yours anymore? Like you've built something beautiful, even stable, but somewhere along the way you gave up pieces of yourself to keep it all together?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," I said. "All the time." He nodded slowly, almost relieved. "It's just, the older I get, the more I realize how loud the world is. Everyone has an opinion about who you should be, how you should love, what success should look like. And somewhere in that noise, I forgot to ask myself what I want. Have you figured it out yet?" He exhaled a slow breath. "Not fully. But I think I want realness. Conversations like this. People who see beneath the surface." I felt something shift inside me again. Something tender and raw, but not painful. Just awake. "You know," I said, "I used to think my best years were behind me. That the part of me who dreamed big, who asked for more, belonged to a younger version of myself. But lately," I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Lately I've started wondering if maybe there's still more to come. If maybe we can begin again, even at this age." Jason smiled, not with pity, not with amusement, but with admiration. "I hope that's true. Because being here with you, it feels like the most honest place I've stood in years." We sat for a while in silence, sipping tea and listening to the wind move through the wisteria vines. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the patio, and something about it made me want to hold on to the moment just a little longer. "I don't know what this is," he said quietly. "Us. This. Connection." "I don't either," I replied. "But I know it's not nothing." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something soft and unguarded in his expression. Not desire, exactly. Not romance, but reverence. Like I was something rare he hadn't expected to find. I didn't look away. And in that moment, neither of us needed answers. Just presence. Just honesty. When he stood to leave, he lingered by the door, his hand on the frame. "Thank you, Claire," he said, "for showing up, for not pretending." "Thank you," I replied, "for reminding me how much I still want to be seen." He left without fanfare. No promises. No plans. But I stayed by the door for a long while, my fingertips resting lightly on the wood, feeling the echo of what had just passed between us. And somewhere in that stillness, I knew something had changed. Not everything, but something real. The next week unfolded like pages turning gently in a forgotten journal. Each day carried a quiet kind of anticipation, like I was waiting for something without even realizing it. I found myself moving differently through my home, lingering longer over breakfast, humming to myself as I watered the garden, opening the windows wider in the morning to let the breeze run through the house. It was subtle, but it was there, a stirring. I didn't hear from Jason for a few days after our second tea afternoon, and I didn't reach out either. It wasn't a game. It just felt right. The kind of connection that doesn't need constant contact to stay alive. But on Thursday morning, I received a message that made me pause mid-step on the staircase. "Would you let me see your paintings sometime?" I read it twice, maybe 3 times, before replying. "Only if you promise not to laugh. They've been asleep for a long time." His reply came a moment later. "Then it's time they woke up." That afternoon, I pulled out my old sketchbooks. Some of the pages were worn and yellowing, and the covers bore faint smudges of charcoal and paint. I hadn't looked at them in years. I sat on the floor of the guest room, cross-legged like a girl again, flipping through memories rendered in brushstrokes and faded pencil lines. Faces, landscapes, dreamscapes. I saw versions of myself scattered throughout the pages, pieces of a woman I used to know. She had once believed in expression, in color, in leaving a little of herself behind in everything she touched. I had missed her more than I realized. When Jason arrived the next day, I had laid a few of my favorite pieces out on the dining table, nervously wiping my hands on a towel as he stepped inside. "I don't know what I expected," he said softly as he walked over. "But this is beautiful, Claire." I stood a few feet behind him, watching his eyes move from one sketch to the next. There was no judgment in his gaze, just quiet awe. "You have a way of capturing things people don't even know they're feeling," he said. "I used to think art had to be impressive," I admitted. "But now I think it just has to be honest." He turned to look at me, and something in his eyes made my breath catch. That same quiet reverence from before, but now with something deeper behind it. A kind of understanding that words couldn't quite hold. "I hope you keep going," he said. "I think there's still a lot left inside you." We moved to the sunroom, where the late afternoon light softened everything it touched. I poured us tea, and we settled into the chairs like we'd done this 100 times before. But this time, the air between us felt fuller. Not heavier, just more alive. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, wrapping his fingers around his mug. "About how we can begin again, even now." "And?" I asked, curious. "I think I want to," he said. "Not just in theory, in practice. I want to stop chasing things I don't care about. I want to live more like this, present, honest." I nodded slowly. "It's not always easy." "I know," he said. "But I look at you, and I see someone who's starting to remember herself. And it makes me believe I can too." For a long while, we sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind dance through the open windows. There was a kind of intimacy in that stillness, not romantic, not physical, but something profoundly human. Like two people holding space for one another in a way the world often forgets to do. He reached across the small table and rested his hand on mine. It was a simple gesture. No pressure. No expectation. "I hope this doesn't cross a line," he said quietly. "It doesn't," I replied. Because it didn't. It wasn't about boundaries or rules. It was about presence. Respect. The kind of touch that asked for nothing but offered everything. I didn't move my hand away. I let it rest beneath his, feeling the warmth of shared recognition. That we were both people learning to want again. To feel. To admit there were parts of us still unfolding. When he left that evening, he hugged me, gently, deliberately, and I held him just as carefully. It was not a goodbye. It was a thank you. After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, watching the light slowly fade from the sky. Something in me felt fuller, and something else felt fragile, like the petals of a flower just beginning to open after a long winter. Mark noticed the next morning. "You're humming again," he said as he poured his coffee. "I guess I am," I replied. He looked at me for a moment, as if seeing me in a new light, but didn't ask any further questions. And I didn't offer any explanations, because some stories aren't about confession. They're about awakening. And mine was only just beginning. The last time Jason came over, the air carried that in-between feeling, summer slowly folding into fall. The leaves were beginning to dull at the edges, and the light had changed too, lower and warmer, in a way that made everything feel slightly more honest. I had spent the morning cleaning out the little sunroom, the one that used to be a catch-all for baskets of magazines, stray shoes, and forgotten projects. But now it had become something else, a space where I felt real again. I'd moved a small easel in there, cleared a shelf for my paints, even hung a couple of my older pieces on the wall. Nothing fancy. Just fragments of myself coming back together. When he arrived, he brought jasmine tea and a small bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in brown paper. "I saw them and thought of your garden," he said as he handed them to me. "Messy, colorful, beautiful." I smiled, placing them in a glass jar with water, and we sat on the porch, side by side, the kind of quiet between us that needed no explanation. "Claire," he said after a while, his voice softer than usual, "have you ever felt like you were waiting your whole life for something you didn't even know how to name?" I looked at him for a long time, not just at his face, but at the man behind it. Someone who had stumbled into my world asking for tea and stayed long enough to stir parts of me I had forgotten I missed. "Yes," I said, "I have." And it wasn't until I said it out loud that I realized how deeply true it was. "I don't know what this is," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "I just know I feel safe here, like I can breathe, like I don't have to pretend." I nodded slowly. "You don't?" We stayed like that for a while, hands resting close but not quite touching, the weight of possibility gently hanging in the air. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. There was no urgency, no declarations. Just a knowing, a mutual understanding that what we were sharing wasn't common, and that made it precious. "I worry sometimes," I said, "that we've become so used to surviving our days, we forget what it means to actually feel them." Jason looked down, then back up at me. "You make me feel mine. All of them, even the hard ones." He reached out then, not for a kiss or anything daring, just for my hand. I let him take it. And there, in the soft hush of that moment, I didn't feel older. I didn't feel invisible. I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. He stayed for dinner. Nothing fancy. Grilled vegetables, roasted chicken, a bottle of wine we drank too slowly. We talked about little things, and big ones. About music. About aging. About how we both feared slipping into lives that felt too small for our spirits. And when he left that night, he didn't ask to stay. Didn't ask for more than what had already been given. He stood at the door, lingering for a moment, looking at me with that quiet, thoughtful expression that had come to feel like a mirror. "You've given me more than advice," he said. "You've helped me remember who I am when no one's watching." I stepped closer and touched his face, not romantically, but gently, with care. "You've done the same for me." Then he left. No promises, no goodbyes. Just a door softly closing behind a connection that had run its course, but left its mark all the same. In the days that followed, I felt the shift settle in, not like a storm, but like a tide that had come and gone, leaving behind a cleaner shore. I started painting more often. I reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in years. I took long walks alone, listening to music I used to love. And something else happened, too. Mark began to notice. He started coming home earlier. He'd ask how my day had been and really listen. One evening he came into the sunroom while I was sketching and said, "You're glowing lately." What changed? I paused, then looked at him with kind eyes. I did, and it wasn't meant to hurt him. It was just the truth. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't need to. Because what mattered wasn't what had passed between Jason and me, it was what it reminded me of. That life is still happening. That I am still happening. Jason and I never spoke again, but I still think about him sometimes. Not with longing, but with gratitude. He came into my life like a question I had stopped asking, and left as a quiet answer I didn't know I needed. And now? Now I sit in my sunroom, painting while the light pours in, jasmine tea cooling beside me, and I finally feel like I've come back to myself. Not the woman I used to be, but the woman I still had time to become.